Howdy, everyone, and welcome to Moment of Truth, the podcast of American Moment. My name is Saurabh Sharma, the president of American Moment, and I'm joined by
Nick Solheim, the COO of American Moment.
And we've got a fantastic episode for you guys today, and a little bit of a weirder one. We actually don't know when this episode is going to publish. We're putting it in the hopper for a rainy day in case we're not able to record, but I have a feeling that a couple of things are still going to be live no matter when you're listening to this. First of all, please go to our website, americanmoment.org. There you can find all sorts of information about the other things we have cooking, including Summit, a conference on American statecraft. There'll be an interest form or perhaps even an application there, so be sure to fill it out. We're really excited to bring everyone to DC for our inaugural conference sometime in the fall, so please check that out. Nick, is there anything else they should be looking out for?
Well, like you said, I'm not sure when this is going to air. So definitely, just to plug the link one more time, americanmoment.org. I'm sure we'll be announcing something really cool. We always are.
That's right. So what are we doing that's a little bit weird or different this episode? Well, look, we're very epistemically humble here at American Moment. We bring on a guest every week because we recognize that you don't want to hear us blabber on about our takes on things all day and every day. However, I will say that Nick specifically does have some genuine expertise about an area where he has been one of the most entrepreneurial and productive leaders in DC on, and that's specifically the issue of the Arctic. And so this week we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to have Nick go around the table quite literally. Oh, look, there you go. He's standing up right now, and he's going to, and I'm going to interview him about some of his experience running the Wallace Institute for Arctic Security, where he has been intimately involved with some of the key foreign policy debates when it comes to our policy on the Arctic region, whether we should buy Greenland, and a lot more over the last couple of years.
The lighting's a little different from over here. I'm not gonna lie, like it looks a little different. Hopefully my face still looks as good.
For those of you who aren't watching on YouTube, which you should, because we really do our best to make this a fantastic production every week, Nick has officially moved to the other side of the table. So we're gonna go to our episode with Nick Solheim, the Chief Operations Officer for American Moment, a co-founder of Native, and also the founder of the Wallace Institute for Arctic Security now. Welcome to the podcast, stranger that I've never met before.
Thanks for having me, loser.
So, Nick, we're doing something a little bit different this week. We wanted to change up the formula, and I'm going to interview you. And the reason why is because despite how much I rag on you, you're actually fairly accomplished, and you have a subject area expertise that people don't know a lot about. But before we talk about that, why don't you explain a little bit about how you got to the point where you're doing all of the things that you're doing now? We ask every guest what their Washington story is. What's yours?
Oh boy. Well, everyone that's listening might want to pull up a chair. It's a little long, but so I know I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I actually I grew up in Honduras. Well, kind of split between Minnesota and Honduras. My parents are missionaries down there. So grew up on the mission field. Graduated homeschooled while in Honduras, and I moved back to the States in 2015. And started going to a small Christian liberal arts university called the University of Northwestern St. Paul. So, spent some time going to school and trying to learn the craft. And it was a very expensive school, so spent a lot of time working part-time jobs. So I, all at once I was like running political campaigns, opening a coffee shop in the morning, and then like delivering for Jimmy John's over lunch and like taking 18 credits. It was insane. So it was very difficult. Ended up getting a couple of full-time jobs. And the reason I say couple is because I'm not very good at being an employee. So if any of my former employers are listening to this, I apologize. But so kind of my first job was as a legislative assistant at the Minnesota House of Representatives. I was a little big for my britches, as they say. And so I kind of came in with all these ideas and crazy things that I wanted to do. And they were like, no. We want you to respond to letters that constituents send in and file stuff. And then after a couple months of that, they were like, yeah, you're not very good at this. So we're just going to let you go. So after that, I got a job as the communications director at the Republican Party in Minnesota, which I was also not super good at. I probably should not have been selected for that role, but, worked at it for a couple months before, because of just different styles and ideological differences, ended up leaving. And then I decided, it might be a good idea to get out of politics for a while. Like this is pretty rough. So I got a job for a real estate company in Minnesota where I first started to learn, digital marketing. So I got a job as a, what even was the title? It was like the marketing director for this small real estate company. And they primarily, did their business by lead generation on Facebook. This used to be a lot easier than it is now. Facebook used to be a lot more permissible in the way that you could like target people and what kind of messaging you could use and stuff like that. So I got really good at that. And around that time, Max and John, two guys that I work with now, we're starting this company called Native, doing like web development and digital marketing. And I was like, there is some real promise to this digital marketing stuff, especially in real estate. So I'm just going to jump ship. I left voluntarily this time, jump ship to go and join them, and kind of starting this new business. Like I said, this is a long story, but we're getting to the DC part. So, I just start kind of slinging projects with these guys. We're in like 2017 now. And the next year I kind of spend slinging projects, trying to close new work, digital marketing accounts, web development. And we win a political account, a guy by the name of Jeff Johnson, who was running, for the Republican nomination for governor of Minnesota. And so, we started to realize through some of the results that he was getting for his campaign that there was a lot of promise in this, in digital, specifically for politics. And seeing as, John and Max and some of the other folks on our team are like married and have kids, it was kind of like, all right, Nick, like you're the single dude, you go out to DC, start selling these political projects, So I come out here beginning of 2018 and kind of start working in the political world yet again, running the DC office of Native, which is, this web development and digital marketing agency selling projects. So we get to, when was the whole Greenland thing? That was like,
better than I do.
Yeah, that was like, it was like, I want to say it was like June of 2019. It's a big story, Wall Street Journal. It's like, like Trump wants to buy Greenland. How crazy is that? And for those of you that don't know, I've spent a lot of time in the Arctic region. I've led some camping road trip tours in Iceland for a while.
That was one of your 4 part-time jobs you were doing in college.
Yeah. So I was doing a lot. And so I had like some experience with this Arctic realm, and I was like, I'll write something about this. Like, I don't really know anyone that talks about this Arctic stuff, at least in my circle. So I'll just write something for the Star Tribune, which is the main paper in Minneapolis. So I wrote this piece, which I now regret, called The Case Against Arctic Imperialism, arguing that we should not buy Greenland. And it blew up because in that time where, Trump wanted to buy Greenland, allegedly, there were really no experts or anyone that had actually been like working on the Greenland thing consistently here in Washington. So I was getting calls from, staff members for members of Congress that I'd never spoken to before that like found my article and then found me on Twitter and like wanted to call me. And I was getting calls from journalists and it was just kind of nuts. I was realizing that there was no one really doing anything about like America's role in the Arctic. And so I was kind of like, well, if no one else is going to do it, like I know how to build a website and I know how to market stuff. So like, I'm just going to do that. And I'm just going to start, working on this Arctic stuff and meeting with members and just kind of like educating folks on America's role in the Arctic. So, started the Wallace Institute for Arctic Security that summer. I think it was in like August of 2019, and have been working on it ever since. So like I said, kind of a long story, but
so you essentially founded a think tank at the age of 22 at the time?
See, 2019. Yeah, it would have been 22.
Which is absolutely wild, because most of the people in this town who have a particular area of expertise when it comes to a niche area of foreign policy have like PhDs, and you were immediately more visible, more effective, and more influential than all of them.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. There are groups in Washington that work, again, I use the word allegedly, on Arctic policy, because like many other think tanks in this town, all they do is issue white papers. They will show up to, deliver testimony at a committee hearing or something like that when summoned, but they don't really do anything. The Wallace Institute actually, late last year, would have been like October or so, we actually co-hosted a briefing on Arctic security with the House Foreign Affairs Committee. In talking with some of those folks, they were like, yeah, there are some of these like Arctic groups that have been in DC for 20 or 30 years, and none of them have ever asked to like host a briefing with us to talk about the Arctic and educate members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee on it. So like, while there are people in DC that do this stuff, do is a very light word. They write about this stuff, issue white papers, but actually like meeting with members and meeting one-on-one and trying to educate people, there's none of that going on when it comes to the Arctic issue.
That comports with everything we know about DC in general, just sclerotic institutions that aren't fit to task anymore, filled by people who are lazy, don't really want to work hard, and by consequence are ineffective. Makes you really wonder about all the other issues, whether the same thing is happening. So,
you don't have to name names.
Well, we will not. Funnily enough, this is actually how we met. We met at a happy hour in DC, I think in December of 2019 it would have been, a little bit before COVID.
And time flies.
Yeah, and you were one of like a couple of people that I was just visiting DC to see friends, and you were one of a couple of people I just ran into at this happy hour, and I was like, oh, okay, interesting, another person I'll meet. And then you mentioned the Arctic stuff, and I was like, oh, someone else who's a nerd about this very weird issue, because I've been interested in this issue for a long time as well. So I guess walk our listeners through, why does the Arctic matter? Why shouldn't I think of it just like, a random island in the Pacific Ocean or any other, part of the world? Why is the United States' strategic interest there important? And why is it a matter of global import as well?
Yeah, so the foundation of, I guess, America's case for a secure Arctic is, I guess, to use like, Yoram Hazony's thing, like nationalism is an issue of the heart and not of the mind. Like, America is an Arctic nation. We have Arctic territory in Alaska, and there are around, I think at last count, like 18 or 19,000 Americans that live within the Arctic Circle. Now, comparatively with other countries like Russia, Russia has about 3 million people that live in the Arctic Circle. It may not seem like a lot, but if you truly believe that, all American citizens are, deserve like certain inalienable rights, and, deserve the same level of protection from the U.S. military and the federal government, like that's just the basis for all of it. Like we must make sure that those 19,000 people, even though that's a relatively small number of people, they deserve the same level of security as the rest of the citizens of the United States. So like that's certainly the foundation for it. Aside from that, I mean, it's a political region with its own geopolitical challenges like any other. So you've got like the Africa, with China, like debt trapping a lot of these countries and building infrastructure that they can, ultimately like repossess basically to use for their own needs. The same exact thing isn't happening in the Arctic region, but China is trying to invest in its Arctic infrastructure, and it even calls itself a near Arctic nation, despite, at its closest point being like, I think it's like 1,000 miles from the Arctic Circle. They have observer status on the Arctic Council, which, is fine, I guess. There are other countries that do as well. But I think to consider China an Arctic nation is a mistake. And it's certainly, I mean, they currently have more icebreakers than we do. Like, and for the listeners who may not really understand exactly like what an icebreaker is or what it's for, these big ships with these like double bent like steel hulls that are able to cut through. I think the Polar Star, our heavy polar security cutter, can cut through 18 feet of solid ice. And that's the only way that you can sail ships through the Arctic or Antarctic regions when there's ice coverage. So having those is super important to, not just national security, but also like commerce, shipping, if any fishermen get caught up there, being able to rescue them in a timely manner and that sort of thing. The main like geopolitical threat up there is and economic threat is China and their continued investment in the region. But also we've kind of, just due to lack of investment and lack of knowledge about the Arctic region, we've kind of been relegated to like backbenchers, I guess, on Arctic policy. We generally speaking, allow the Canadians and the Danish and the Norwegians to kind of lead the way on what we should be working on, and sometimes they lead us astray. And so, really, the case for investing in this region is it's a region that we have territory in, and if we truly believe America is the best country on earth, we shouldn't like dominate it per se, but we should certainly be like the foremost leader, like we are in the other regions where we have our own territory.
So what are the resources that make, say, China interested in the region? They don't have a territorial interest to protect, so why do they care? What is it about the Arctic that is so appealing to China as it starts to expand via Belt and Road and other initiatives, and why do they care?
Yeah, so there are two distinct things that China in particular is interested in. So the easy like low hanging fruit here for them is rare earth mineral mining and refinement. So that's their main interest in Greenland, which is a Danish territory. So for the listeners who don't know a ton about Greenland and basically how this whole the US should buy Greenland thing came about. China has been attempting to invest in Greenland, in building infrastructure in particular. So ports, airports, and that sort of thing, at either reduced cost or free in exchange for basically unfettered rare earth mineral mining and refinement. So the things that they use to make the chips that go in your iPhone, and like other rare earth minerals that can be used to manufacture technology, that is like their main interest in Greenland. And luckily, due to pressure from the State Department and Secretary Pompeo, the Danish were able to step in and put a stop to that because they have ultimate authority over Greenland's foreign relations at the moment. So that's like one of their key interest areas, is like making sure that they have those rare earth minerals and they can get them cheaply to continue to manufacture technology that everyone in the West uses. And then the other is a little more complex. So shipping routes is the short answer. So as we've seen with this ship that just got stuck in the Suez Canal, what was it called? The Evergreen? The Evergreen. Okay. So, a large amount of, China's traffic to the West goes through the Suez Canal. And they recognize that is a massive geopolitical risk because the United States also has its navy in the region, as well as our allies have a lot of military resources in the region. So if we ever do escalate to a tenser scenario, economically or or militarily, they recognize that we can just block off the Suez Canal, with our Navy basically, and prevent them from shipping goods in the easiest way to get them to other places. So what they've been working on is they've been collaborating with the Russians to ship goods through the NSR, which is the Northern Sea Route. It goes over Russia in the same way that, Western Europeans were searching for the Northwest Passage, to be able to get to Asia from the other direction. So when they ship things through the Northern Sea Route, they can shave anywhere up to 10 days off their shipping time, which, every year potentially could save them trillions of dollars in shipping costs, and also like risk. The likelihood that Russia could or would cut off their shipping routes is minimal. Like, it's highly unlikely that would happen. So, not only are they looking for resources that they can mine and use right now, but they also have a very long-term view of the Arctic and of the potential that it has. As the ice continues to melt in the Arctic region, and it's easier to send ships earlier in the year, the amount of traffic that they send through the Northern Sea Route increases every year, and it's really based on longevity. Like, they want to ensure that they are the world's #1 training partner for decades to come.
So you mentioned that as the ice continues to melt, this situation will continue to evolve. And that's a lot of why this is, in some ways, one of the most dynamic regions in terms of an evolving geopolitical landscape in the world, is because as the Arctic ice melts, more and more of those shipping routes are open for larger parts of the year, and you don't need as specialized ships in order to do it. What's the timeline that we're looking at on those waterways opening up for global commerce in a serious way?
I mean, there are a lot of different estimates from a lot of different scientists that are funded by a lot of different billion-dollar nonprofit organizations that want to push their agenda. So the very clear answer is who's to say? Who knows? What I will say is that we've certainly seen over the last couple years that it is days, if not weeks earlier, that the ice is melting every couple of years. It is pretty accelerated. To give the historical sample, talk about the Titanic, 1912, right? Sunk because it hit an iceberg, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, in, I believe it was mid-April of that year. Where the Titanic was sailing, there aren't icebergs anymore. As far as I know, there's not. So this thing has it changes pretty quickly. And I think anyone who has a very hard, I don't want to say goal, has a very hard measurement of when this is going to happen, is lying to you, and is probably funded by someone who wants you to be scared. Because we've seen AOC talk about, we have 10 years, guys, 10 years left. And it's truthfully, we don't know when any of this stuff is going to happen, or what the actual effects are going to be, but it is happening right now, regardless of whether we can do something about it or not. So I understand this is kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but it's changing every year, and it is already in the last decade, the ice is melting 2 or 3 weeks earlier than it used to.
So this issue ends up being a gateway into all sorts of black pills about the way that the American regime operates at the national level. The classic example being icebreakers. First of all, you explained already what an icebreaker is. How many do we have, and how many do the other parties at hand have?
So we technically have 2. And the reason I say
1,000, 100?
2. So, and by the way, mind you, that's not just for the that's not just for the Arctic, it's for the Antarctic as well.
Which are on opposite sides of the globe.
Yes. Yes. And months of travel time between. So the 2 that we have a what's called a medium polar security cutter, which is, I think it was built in 2006. It is the U.S. Coast Guard's Healy, and that's the most recent one that we've built. It's capable of cutting, I think, up to, I think it's like 7 to 9 feet of ice or something like that. So generally pretty much only good for the Arctic region. The stuff that the U.S. Coast Guard needs to do in Antarctica requires something a little more heavy duty, which is why we have the heavy polar security cutter, the Polar Star, which is capable of cutting, like I said earlier, like 18, 19, 20 feet of ice. And that is usually gone for at least 6 months a year, because they have to cut their way to a station, an American station in Antarctica to resupply our mission there. So, it's usually gone there for a while. And then when it gets back to the States, it's usually in dry docks for a couple months. So like effectively at any given time, we have one. Russia, to give a comparison, has, I think at last count, 60. They have a lot more Arctic territory than we do and a lot more people that live there. So it's like, everyone wants to panic about the, Russians having like 60 icebreakers, but they also have a lot more infrastructure and a lot more people up there than we do. The primary concern comes from, countries like China, which have, I think they have 3 or 4 now. They just launched another one a couple weeks ago, so maybe 4 or 5. And they, they're not an Arctic country, and they have more than we do.
And they're building more, right? Like they have a bunch under construction.
Yes, they're actively building more. And there are a lot of countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, I think even Estonia. I think Estonia has more than we do, and they're not even an Arctic country either. So yeah, it's obviously very, concerning that we've allowed other countries much smaller and sometimes like less technologically advanced than us, have better, ice-breaking equipment than we do. I actually think South Africa is another good example. I think they have 3, because, obviously they're in the southern hemisphere, so they're close to Antarctica. They do some scientific research there. I think they might actually have more icebreakers than we do. Don't fact check me on that, but.
So why don't we have more? What have been the barriers to constructing more? Because look, I mean, the American military is very well funded. We have lots of boats and planes and all sorts of other military equipment. Why has this, seemingly important geostrategic area of interest not gotten the same level of attention?
Yeah, I think there are a ton of contributing factors. So one, is kind of a geopolitical focus on environmentalism instead of security. So, as we covered on our episode with Micah Meadowcroft, the environment, and particularly the American environment, is important to protect. But so is our national security, and always making sure that we kind of weigh those things hand in hand. And, people like John Kerry really don't do that sort of thing. Like they just really focus on like the environmentalism stuff and global warming, and they don't really do any focus on, national security or anything like that. So that's one, is we've kind of like the Arctic's like pet issue has been climate change. The polar bears like have nowhere else to go, and we haven't really been focusing on it from
polar bears, some of the most aggressive human murdering animals on the planet. Polar bears will eat your face and your children. They are not cute.
Yeah, I will respond with the case for polar bears article soon. But no, so like that's one reason. I think another is, Congress's just general delegation of responsibility to like doing anything that's not tax cuts. So we see this with a ton of things. Like there are things that don't get updated for decades. Like there are FCC regulations, that like there are things governing the internet right now that were created before the internet existed. And it's just like, Congress and the administration and just like governance in general is really far behind the times on these issues, because they would rather delegate the responsibility to waxing poetic about climate change instead of actually doing something. And then kind of a consequence of that, and kind of the last point here, is that since we don't do this sort of thing anymore, we've lost the capability to do so. So, we talk a lot about, restoring manufacturing and stuff like that to the United States on this podcast. Simply put, we barely have a capacity to build Polish security cutters anymore. So even though, the federal government says that there must be a bidding process for all things that, get built for the U.S. military, as far as I know, there is only one company in the United States that is currently capable, and the only one that has really for the last couple of decades, of building Polish security cutters. Just one company. And it's not the main thing that they do. The main thing they do is build other ships, and they also just happen to dabble in this.
Do they build those for other countries?
I'm actually not sure. I don't think so, because I would assume they're probably not the best at it. Because again, like I said, it's not what they specialize in. They do it because I think if they stopped doing it, there would be, nobody else in the United States to do it, which is how you end up with, in the president's defense budget, where they're talking about, so President Trump, before he left office, had another defense budget, and he called for a massive investment in our Polish security cutter program. And one of the lines in there that ended up getting added was, we have all this money to appropriate it. Here's how long it should take, blah, blah, blah. And if we literally can't build them or find someone to do it to the specifications that we want, we could also appropriate money to lease these from other countries. So basically, what the White House was laying the groundwork for was, if we wanted to go to the Canadians and say, hey, you nice 8 icebreakers you have there, mayhaps we have 2 for money. And there are a couple other countries that we could go to. That's just an example, but literally we've lost the capacity to do this sort of thing. And right now, they're laying the keel for a Polish security cutter right now, because the heavy that we currently have is 20 years past its expiration date. I saw a news story the other day. They're literally running out of parts to fix it. So they're laying the keel for another one. They're saying that it'll take, on average, 4 to 5 years to construct one at a time. Meanwhile, during World War II, when the United States was charged with, protecting Greenland and Iceland, we churned out 7 in 4 years. Under FDR, we were able to build 7 Polish security cutters, not as technologically advanced as what we have now. We were able to build 7 of them in 4 years, to protect, by the way, other countries, not ours. And we can't even build one in under 4 years now.
Getting to FDR, explain why the Wallace Institute for Arctic Security is called what it is.
Oh man, I'm gonna get so many hate tweets for this. I was already getting, I've gotten a lot of hate for this from folks for a long time, but so the Wallace Institute is named after a often forgotten vice president. Who is it that you brought up earlier that you thought it was?
I just jokingly said it was named after George Wallace. That is not true, I believe.
Yeah. No, it is not George Wallace. It's named after Henry Agard Wallace, who was FDR's second vice president. And it's actually not because of, the fact that all these icebreakers got built during World War II. I actually don't know how much Wallace had to play in that. The reason I actually called it that is I read, we should add his biography to AmCanon. I'm gonna send Jake a note about that. I'm forgetting what it's called, but I'd read this really good biography about him. I just finished it when this whole Greenland thing happened, and kind of the key pivotal point of Wallace's career. And there are a lot of things correctly that people criticize him for. He could be sometimes naive in dealing with the Soviets and stuff like that. All of that is true. But he had this one really good speech that was called The Century of the Common Man. I should actually add, Jake, I should have Jake add that YouTube video of that speech to Amkin. We'll talk about it later. But so in this speech, he talks about after the end of World War II, he says, what a lot of people in Washington want to come out of this war is a century of economic and military imperialism. That's what everyone in DC wants right now. And what the world actually needs is what he calls the century of the common man. So, of the laborer, both in the Soviet Union and in the United States, of the laborer, of the farm worker, of the citizens in countries in Africa who have been ravaged by war. His main focus was that, the rest of the 20th century and going into the 21st century would not be focused on military and economic imperialism, but would instead be focused on, advancing the issues and causes of the common man. Now, I didn't really realize this before I just started talking about it, but this was kind of the beginning of like my brain turning towards the kind of politics and policies that American Moment supports and is, training people to advocate for. I read and watched the speech. It's like 5 minutes long. And I said, yeah, like, why didn't that happen? Why didn't we care? About the issues that were plaguing the common man. And so, yeah, it just really resonated with me. And I was like, no one really knows who this guy is or like remembers him. And so I'm just going to name my thing after him. What's the worst that can happen? And it turns out the worst that can happen is like just people tweet mean things at me, and they do that anyway. So, yeah. I also, by the way, just one kind of like side note, after I read this biography, I was living in Navy Yard at the time, and I was like looking for a new apartment, and Wallace lived in, this was before like vice presidents lived in the Naval Observatory. I think Spiro Agnew was the first one to live in the vice president's residence at the Naval Observatory. But Wallace lived in the Wardman Park building, which is, very high-end condos now up in Woodley Park in Northwest DC across from the zoo. And he walked, when he was Secretary of Agriculture, he walked from there to the Department of Agriculture and back every day. So for those of you that, don't know the geography of DC, that's like 10 miles round trip every day. And then sometimes,
which is roughly how much you walk every day.
Yeah, it's true. And this was how I got started on that. Like, I was like, okay, cool. He lived in this super cool neighborhood and he walked down to the hill every day. I'm going to do that. And so I moved in to an apartment building across the street that was much cheaper than the $1 million condos that are in that building now. And moved into the apartment building across the street and walked down to my office close to the hill every day. That was actually part of how I got not fat. It's because I walked so far every day. Now, I don't throw like boomerang on the banks of the Potomac like he used to, but I like to say that I've learned a lot from him kind of emulating his lifestyle. He even did that as like vice president too. Like he would like walk down, I don't know if he was like in the White House or in the executive office building or what, but like he would walk down there. I think most of the time without like any Secret Service detail or anything, like would just walk down there on his own. And FDR rewarded him by kicking him off the ticket. But anyway,
many such cases.
Yeah.
I guess the final question I have for you is, should we buy Greenland?
Boy, this is some great water, Saurabh.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
When Nick talks about this, it causes a national security incident. So
yeah, I have to be limited in what I can say about this because I have had ongoing conversations with people who are still currently like there are people who are careers in the administration that I've worked with, so I don't want to give too much of their stuff away. I don't think we should outright buy Greenland. And I get it's a meme, it's funny, and if you tweet,
I want a Trump hotel in Nook.
if you tweet buy Greenland memes at me, like I promise I will laugh and give you a like. I don't necessarily think still that it's like the best solution. I think it's a lot more nuanced. Now, if we were to acquire Greenland. Say we didn't,
Annex.
Yeah, okay, annex is also not the word that I would use. But really the actual logistical way forward for Greenland, if it did want to become part of the United States, there has been a growing independence movement in Greenland, which, by the way, is a small country. Like, for those of you that don't know, it's like 55,000 people. There's like not a lot there, not a lot of people there. So basically, they've kind of had this growing independence movement for years. It's mainly the upper echelons of like Greenlandic society who, are mainly the Danish that have been administering the government and, their descendants and that sort of thing. But it's basically, in how the culture is now, they're saying that, Denmark still having Greenland as a territory is imperialism and it's evil. Therefore, we're going to be independent. The only problem with that is that Greenland receives a stipend from Denmark every year that is, I think at last count, like 58% of their GDP. So if they like leave,
it's like Alaska in that sense. It's basically a welfare state.
I don't necessarily agree with that, but okay. But on the Greenland issue, basically the way forward for them would be that they have an independence referendum with a couple of options. We stay with Denmark, we become independent, like completely independent, which would likely destroy their economy. Their modern economy. They would be fine. Like, people would still be able to feed themselves. But like their modern economy where they're wanting to do trade with modern countries and stuff like that would take a massive hit. And then the third option would be, we would like to explore other options for ownership, which is basically like leaving the door open to becoming an administered territory, but with more political freedom than Denmark currently offers. So the main draw here would be for the Greenlandic people would be offering U.S. citizenship. And this isn't like some sort of gimme where it's like, hey, if we do this, immigration agreement with Mexico, like 1 million of them can come here. Like, it's literally 55,000 people, and of those 55,000 people, like maybe 2,000 would come, but like basically making them citizens, allowing them travel to the United States to move here if they want, and basically exchange and education. And so that would be kind of the selling points for the Greenlandic people. And then for the United States, obviously, like rare earth mineral refinement, oil, extension of our exclusive economic zone under the UN Convention on Law of the Sea Charter, fishing rights, I guess. Like there's a whole list of reasons like why we should want Greenland. I am mainly concerned with trying to find a way to do it that is equitable for the Greenlandic people and also for the United States. Like, there's no reason that there are a lot of reasons why they should want to be a part of the United States, and we should show them that. And if that's the way that they decide to move, I think that would be really fantastic. And I would also like to become Emperor of Greenland one day. So
I was going to say that you're being very diplomatic, and then you said that. So I guess not. I remember realizing just how serious you were about this Arctic stuff when before I moved to DC, when we were doing one of our early trips for American Moment, I was staying with you at your apartment because I had no job and I did not want to pay for a hotel. And you wake up at 6 a.m. and listen to, is it Finnish TV, Icelandic TV?
It's NRK. It's like the national Norwegian channel. They do a nightly show called Dagsrevyen, and it's like their like nightly news. Yeah. And so after it airs, I watch the previous day's news in Norwegian the next day. And it's mostly like, it's like fun to listen to because it's like listening to your local news channel. It's like, local woman catches really big fish. It's like a lot of it's really good, feel good stuff.
It's Norway. There's not that much happening. But the point being is that you speak the language and you speak a whole bunch of others. What are the languages that you speak? And insult me in one of them.
I'm not going to insult you in any. I don't want archives of this showing up later. But English and Spanish are kind of my primaries. Spanish coming from living in Honduras for so long, and then I was kind of like, the way that I learned Spanish was through immersion. So like I was the only white kid for like 100 miles in Honduras. So I had like no other. I was 11 and I could either talk to my parents or like spend time learning a language with other people. So like all I knew how to say was como se dice, which is like how do you say, and I would just like point at stuff and act stuff out. And it's not like a lot of trial and error, but if you spend enough time kind of immersed in something. So anyway, I'm getting away from the point here. So in the last couple of years, I've been able to build up a pretty good proficiency in English, Spanish, Norwegian, Danish, and Icelandic. Finnish is a whole other animal entirely, because even though it's close to Scandinavia it's a part of Scandinavia, and there's some overlap, it's actually a Finno-Ugric language. So it's like the root is completely different. So that one's a little more difficult for me. And then I've been trying for years. I think it's actually in my bio on the website. I've been trying for years to learn Kalaallisut, which is the native language spoken in Greenland. And I got to say, there's just a real lack of material out there. Like there's not a lot for me to be able to immerse myself in. But really, like if I was to give like informal advice to anyone listening that wants to learn a language, like start your day with it. And that applies to anything, actually. Like if you want to learn anything, like start your day with it and spend an hour doing it. It's been listening to Norwegian news, or Icelandic music, or, reading books about presidents, or about, reading the Federalist Papers, whatever. Like spend the first hour of your day doing it without your phone. Turn your phone off. Don't have any distractions. But yeah, that's kind of how I learned.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast that you are always on, Nick. And hopefully this was a nice change of pace for our guests. Thank you. All right, Nick, come back on this side of the table, I guess.
All right.
Once again, every week after we have our guest on, in this case, he's still here, we like to talk about a few pieces on AmCanon. One of the things we talked about a lot in this episode was China and its relationship with the Arctic region and what its aspirations are. I think that very often people tend to caricature what China exactly wants. There's a lot of, frankly, kind of silly sounding language about the imperial dragon rising again, and some really silly dialogue that happens in DC and elsewhere about the China issue. And so we thought that we'd point out what exactly it is that China's leaders say that they want. There's a piece that's on AmCanon that was published at Palladium magazine, one of the coolest, most interesting magazines out there, talking about the future of governance. And it is Xi Jinping in his own words. It's a translation of one of the seminal speeches he gave to the Chinese Communist Party a few months ago, I believe, or may have even been a couple years at this point. We highly recommend you check it out, along with all sorts of other pieces on there, because look, may as well go to the source material when it comes to these questions of geopolitics and grand strategy, and you certainly don't need to hear from us what we think these leaders have to say when they have committed it to writing and to the spoken word themselves. Nick, what did you want to talk about?
I was going to talk about this national interest article, but now that I'm remembering what I was talking about, the AmCanon assignment is going to be that speech, the Century of the Common Man, Henry A. Wallace. We're going to put it on AmCanon, and we're going to let everyone watch it. So that is my AmCanon piece for the week.
Well, be sure to check that out and all the rest of what we have at americanmoment.org/AmCanon, and check out the rest of what we have on our website. You can find us on social media at ammoment.org on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Parler, and probably a bunch of other platforms by the time this is published. Once again, our website is americanmoment.org, and please be sure to check out everything that we have going. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Moment of Truth is an American Moment Studios production filmed at the Conservative Partnership Center. Our podcast is produced and edited by Jake Mercier and Jared Cummings. Our intro music is A Minor Struggle by Ryan Serenich. Don't forget to like and subscribe on all platforms, and you can go to AmericanMoment.org to learn more.